Kodesh, to the sukkah to be more exact. Today, Mitzvah Shem, a very interesting topic. It's really a two-part topic. I wanted to talk about the sugya of sleeping in halacha, which of course on Sukkot gets a very big focus as being one of the major mitzvahs of Sukkot, obviously. And more so than sukkah, to go a bit global, a bit of the inyanim of sleeping in halacha in general, and kala terakula. It's not easy to give a shiur on Sukkot. One realizes that giving a shiur on Sukkot, you're running the risk of being goyvar lifnei iver and putting your oilam to sleep, chas v'shalom. And that's why I myself have already taken the precaution of making sure that I parked myself in the sukkah so that even if the shiur puts me to sleep, but what I'm done, I'll be in the sukkah. The sukkah is the most unique mitzvah, a mitzvah that clearly you can be mekayim while you're asleep. What could be better than that? What kind of a ava, what kind of a chibuk from the Rebbeinu Shalom is that? How much ahava is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says the mitzvah is just go to sleep. Like when it comes to the mitzvah of sukkah, a person, the more he's in the sukkah, the more he sleeps in the sukkah, the more mitzvah that he's getting. Let's try today to focus. First, I want to talk. I suppose that, albeit I gave my mekaymis more in the global, but I do believe that the inyana, the yoim of the sukkah, probably takes slight precedence. So first, I'll focus, at least in the part one of this year, I'll focus on sleeping in the sukkah in general. The topic meaning general klape, the specific klape sukkahs, and sleeping in the sukkah. And then in Mitzvah Shem, we'll try to get a bit more global and to try to get into the shailas in general of sleeping in halacha. Can a person be mekayim a mitzvah when he's asleep, etc., etc. Kinyanim when he sleeps, etc., etc. All the different shailas that can come up. So the first shaila I think that we all want to talk about is something very unique about one that learns Masechta Sukkah. You'll notice that in Masechta Sukkah, in the Gemara's, Mishnayos, there's no Mishnah that says that a person is chayiv to sleep in a sukkah. It's a very bold statement, but it doesn't say in the Mishnah you're chayiv to sleep in the sukkah. The Mishnah HaRav, the Mishnah in Kav Chesed Mid Beis, the famous Mishnah that tells us that during these days of Sukkot, you make your house arai and you make your sukkah into your keva. That's the mitzvah, is to make it keva. Oichel v'shoise u'metayel in the sukkah. That's where your kfiyas is. What does it mean metayel in the sukkah? If I'm going to take a tiyul from here all the way to the couch in my sukkah over there, it's not going to be kengaisa tiyul. Metayel is from Lashon of Aramaic metalala, to sit in the shade of the sukkah, just to sit and enjoy the sukkah. That's the mitzvah of sukkah, is to sit, to enjoy. But it says oichel shoise u'metayel, doesn't say to sleep in the sukkah. That which he has to make his sukkah into his makim kavua. It says oichel v'shoise u'metayel, and it doesn't say sleep. Is it true that one would maybe make the false understanding that perhaps there's no mitzvah to sleep in the sukkah? But that for sure it can't be. There are mishnayos upon gemaras. Every example, a very interesting statistic in Masechta Sukkah, every example of Masechta Sukkah of a person doing something is always sleeping in the sukkah. Always, every case, hayashon tachas amita. The Mishnah says, Daf Yud Dalid, L'gabi a kotin. When is a kotin chayiv? When is he chayiv to sleep in the sukkah? Every discussion of sukkah in the Mishnah is always klape sleeping. So it's true, we have a Mishnah in Daf Kav Ches when it talks about the chiyuvim of sukkah, oichel, shoyse, metayel in the sukkah, it doesn't say sleep. Yet every example in Mishnah Sukkah and Gemara Sukkah, it's always about a yashan tachas, this type of schach and that type of schach, a yashan tachas the mita, a yashan here, the cotton, that's tzarech li'imai, when does he have to sleep in the sukkah? So it's clear. And Dav Shlufin in the sukkah, schach posel, it does, at what point are you allowed to sleep under it, etc. Derech Agav, the Kaf Chaim writes, well, I'll tell you why the Gemara gave the example of sleeping under a mita and doesn't talk about eating under a mita, because you're not allowed to have food under a bed. And so therefore they don't want to talk about the case of where a person is eating under the bed, because that can create a ruach ra on the food. So since it's going to create a ruach ra on the food, it doesn't want to use that example of eating under the bed. But upon him, it certainly is clear from all of the Gemaras and Mishnayos that sleeping under a sukkah, sleeping in a sukkah I certainly was most understood in Pashit that that's the mitzvah of Sukkah. Rashi and Dav Chafam and Beis brings down, Iker, Yeshiva, Sukkah is Achila, Shtia, and Shena. That's an Iker. An Iker is the sleeping in the Sukkah. The B'kur Yankiv in the Tav Reish Lamed Beis says the Iker is Shena. The Gemara in Dav Chavav says, Adarabba, a person is allowed to eat a rye outside the Sukkah. You can have a snack outside the Sukkah. You can have even one cookie outside the sukkah as long as it's not the amount of a gebeya. And you can go outside the sukkah. You can have drinks outside the sukkah. V'shteitzach, Yisrael Kadeshim don't eat outside the sukkah. And they want to get the chumrah and the mitzvah and the more chavivis of eating in the sukkah. But achila rai is mutter outside the sukkah. Yet the Gemara in Sukkah Dav Chavav says that sleeping outside the sukkah is aser even a shenas arai. I think the Mishabura brings down 100 mil. I think it's 54 seconds. Under 54 seconds is debatable. But once you hit 54 seconds, even though that's clearly an arai, says the Gemara, it's no longer arai. Because when you're dealing with sleeping, somebody gets a freshness, he gets a frischkeit, even with sleeping 54 seconds, and even an arai. And therefore, he has to take it rejuvenates him, even in a right amount of sleeping, and therefore he must do every sleeping in Adarabba. That's the reason why, says the Munkatcher, Davar Nifla. That's the reason why when the Mishnah Daf Kov Ches wants to talk about a person, chiyuvim in the sukkah, and wants to talk about a person's responsibility of making the sukkah into keva. So it says, oichel in the sukkah, shoyse in the sukkah. Why? Because there's talking about keva. Sleeping is even when it's not a kviyas. Even a rai you must do in the sukkah. So it couldn't bring it over there. What's it going to say? Oichel, shoyse, and yoshin, boifing kfiyas in the sukkah. It's not true. When it comes to sleeping, you're always chayiv to sleep in the sukkah, even when it's an arai. Now I am aware, and we'll get to it in a moment, that maybe many of the listeners and many of the people have a minig that they don't sleep in the sukkah. And about it, we'll try to explain the minig Yisrael, but just an understanding, like it says in Tafresh Lamites, that certainly a person is chayiv to be sleeping in the sukkah. And that's why for Shteitzach, all the cases, Yoshin Tachas Amita is actually an interesting statistic. In Masech the Sukkah, it doesn't say Yotze Yidei Chayvasa only one time. It says it one time, Yotze Yidei Chayvasa. Eina Yotze Yidei Chayvasa. Person that's Yoshin Tachas Amita is Eina Yotze Tachas, Eina Yotze Yidei Chayvasa. Why not? It doesn't say that. Lashon Eina Yotze the Meleches Shloima explains, he's in the Mishnayos. He says, because when it comes to eating, Murray the Gerade, he says when it comes to eating, a person technically could be potter from sukkah all the time. Okay, maybe on the first night, but that night might be midin sukkah, that might be mitzad chag sukkah itself. But technically, a person could go days and days and just eat potatoes and eat araidik things and never be chayiv in sukkah. And the Balmor says that's the reason why on matzah we don't make a bracha, but yet. Excuse me. Excuse me. Because on matzah, a person technically only has to eat on the first night, right? But sukkah, a person has the responsibility of sleeping in the sukkah. And a person can't go 3 days without sleeping. Like the Gemara tells us, it's not possible for a person to go 3 days without sleeping. And that's why when it comes to sleeping, there's an obvious problem. He's going to for sure have to sleep over the course of Sukkot. And that's why it says, Hayashan Tachas Amita is Eina Yotze Yidei Chayvasai. Because it wouldn't be possible for him to go all the days of Sukkot without sleeping. So therefore, Sukkot and sleeping is hand in hand. A person must make sure that he sleeps in the sukkah because it's not possible to go all the days without sleeping. And like we said before, if he would have a sheina sarai, so that would be taka, also responsible, mechuyev inside the sukkah. So this is why all the Mishnayos mention always yashan, because for Keret, yashan is the ikr, what you're supposed to do in the sukkah. The obvious kasha is, if that's the case, so then why is there no bracha? Why is there no bracha when it comes to sleeping on a sukkah? That's the minig Yisrael, most people at least. They don't make a bracha when they sleep in the sukkah. They certainly make a bracha when they eat something in the sukkah. So this lemaisa, the truth is, the Baal Mor sheet is yes. He says you're chayiv to make a bracha on sleeping in the sukkah because it's not possible to be without sleeping in the sukkah. And Taka, the Taisus has a mashmoyas, there's a sheet in Taisus in Sukkah, that yes, make a bracha. The Rosh already tells us, and Tafresh Lametes, the Shulchan Aruch brings it down in Sif Ches. He says that there's no bracha on sleeping, because once you make the bracha on eating is an ikr that patters the sleeping. I guess it's an ikr maisa. Sleeping is more, we'll see in a moment, of a non-maisa. But Al Kapanim, the Mishabura brings down, it would be mashma from over here. Let's say a person, he's not eating, so then maybe he should make a bracha on the sleeping. The only reason why he doesn't make a bracha on the sleeping in general is because the eating patters that which he's going to do on the sleeping afterward. But let's say a person has a situation where he's not eating, whatever the case might be. So then l'chayra, he would make a bracha on the sleeping. This is not the minig. Mishabura's mashma, it's not the minig. The Ramah says, v'hachi noig, to not make a bracha on sleeping. The Aruch HaShulchan says we have a minig to not make a bracha on sleeping, and we could talk about it for a long time. Why? The truth is, the Steipler and in Bnei Brak, they have the minig of making a bracha on the sleeping because that's an ikr chelik. The ikr chelik of the mitzvah sukkah. There's a story in the Orchos Rabbeinu. A guest came to the Steipler sukkah, and Steipler told him, "He's not, you can make a bracha." So he said, "Well, he wants a piece of cake." The Steipler said, you're allowed to make a bracha of a leishiv even without the piece of cake when you come to your sukkah's chaveira. He says, yeah, but he wants the cake anyways. I guess he wanted the Steipler's cake, some kind of a skula. But akapanim, the Maisa, the Steipler does have that anhaga, which is to make a bracha even if a person is taka just going to sleep. That is zicher. That's the minig maybe in Bnei Brak. I'm not sure. I don't think that's the minig of the rest of the Welt. Upon one thing is bar is that you see over here that the mitzvah of sleeping in the sukkah is certainly a mitzvah. It's certainly a mitzvah, and not only is it a mitzvah, it's a chiyuv. Ad kedei kach, the child's age of what is kaveya if he's chayiv in the mitzvah of sukkah is at what point can he go to sleep without his mother? So the Aruch HaShulchan brings down in Tafresh Mem Sif Beis, no, for children, sometimes they're colder, sometimes their level of mitzdayer is going to be earlier. That's true. But our Kapanim, it seems to be barer that in a normal situation, if there's no mitzdayer, a person is chayiv to be sleeping in the sukkah. That's the chayr. If a person, he puts his head down in the middle of a beis medrash, maybe he'll say, that's the norm. That's Teish V'Kein Tedur. Once in a while, he falls asleep. So what should I tell you? The Ben Ish Chai in Parshas Hazinu, he sounds like he's not so thrilled about this. He says if you see somebody and he's being menamnim in the middle of Kriyas HaTorah, he says go and wake him up because even a Shenas Harai seems to be a problem. Now, I must tell you, a person is on a trip. He's driving somewhere. Okay, if you're the driver, there's a Shalom Pekuach Nefesh. If you need a rest, and then you're allowed to take a rest on the side of the road. But what's the reason why? Well, first of all, we have he's maybe a Holchei Drachim. Holchei Drachim is Pater. We have another Cheshbin. Maybe that's Kein, also some type of a Teish V'Kein Teduru. Sometimes you can have a situation of where the person himself, he might be an Oisik B'Mitzvah. Maybe if he's going to visit older people or parents or whatnot. So maybe he's an Oisik B'Mitzvah, and perhaps he's Pater Min HaMitzvah. No, if you see somebody that he actually fell asleep in the Beis Medrash, while he's learning on Sukkot, maybe there's a makom to be makel because we'll see soon he didn't voluntarily go to sleep. But we see clear from the Poskim that it's a very, very chamer thing to sleep outside of a sukkah, even a shenas arai, even a small amount of time. There's a B'kur Yankiv that discusses it in Sivkot Lamed Aleph, Sivkot Lamed Zayin. Maybe, like I said, it's Kaina Teishu Kain to do. It's a normal thing for a person to maybe fall asleep. No, but this would answer up another Gemara, famous Gemara in Dafnim Gimel and Sukkah. The Gemara talks about that during the Simchas Beis Shavis, the Koyanim would be mamish the whole entire time. We didn't have a chance to sleep. We slept on the laps of our friends. On the laps of our friends, a katfei dadi, or on the shoulders of our friends. What's that all about? They can't sleep even a shenas harai. See, you'll say they were Holchei Drachim, you'll say they were Oisik B'Mitzvah, or maybe you'll say that maybe they involuntarily fell asleep. So maybe when someone falls asleep, maybe the Yisur is going to sleep outside the sukkah. All this is debatable. Ad Kedei Kach, the place can discuss who needs the minig of Mishnah Torah on Hoshana Rabbah. We see people fall asleep in the shul, and it's Yotzeh Schorei Bev Seidai, because since they're falling asleep outside of the sukkah, so if they're falling asleep outside the sukkah, who needs the whole entire minig? We'd rather them be wide awake, or at least not, or if they're going to go to sleep, let them go to sleep inside the sukkah. But this is the etzim hasugya. You see, clear there is a chiyuv to be sleeping in a sukkah. Now, the ma'isa, what's the pshat? Is a minig oila? Many people, good people, that taka don't sleep in the sukkah. But I must tell you before we continue, if you find out that there's somebody who sleeps in the sukkah, don't look at him and say he's a machmir. That fellow, he sleeps in the sukkah. He's not a machmir. He's doing what the halacha says. We have to find the limit schutz for those that aren't zeicha to sleep in the sukkah. But upon him, one that sleeps in the sukkah is doing what the halacha says, even a shenas harai. Many people think that sleeping in the sukkah is a mitzvah tfluya ba'aretz. They think it's a mitzvah in Eretz Yisrael. Yeah. If he has a cousin, a brother, a shraga, an uncle that sleeps in Eretz Yisrael in the sukkah. Some people think it's maybe ches North or Lakewood is does. So we have to try and figure out what's talking the pshat. There's a lot of people that they don't sleep in the sukkah. So the Maisa, the Makor, of course, is the Ramah. Ramah and Tafresh Lametes, he brings down. The Torah says, look, you're chayiv to sleep in the sukkah, and you're chayiv more than even eating when it comes to, like we said, sleeping, even a small amount, a person must sleep. Mashenka, when it comes to a small amount of eating, he's not chayiv to do in the sukkah. And that's what it says in the Torah. Comes again the Darkei Moshe, and he quotes Mordechai. He says, look, it's very cold. And sometimes you can even become a chayda shein by sakana. So that's the reason why many people, Yemeim B'Shleimim, don't sleep in the sukkah. They have a p'tur of mitzdayer. Okay, but that's very nice for maybe, the cold Russian summers. And more so, the Bach discusses over there that, it was so hard to be in the sukkah because the soups were freezing. If anybody has that matziv, so then it's what to talk about. Somebody was telling me in Toronto, it's quite cold. But Akapanim nowadays in Eretz Yisrael, New York, certainly in Eretz Yisrael, but it's certainly not that cold in New York, or maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'm going to be told that it is pretty cold in New York. But in Poland, it was freezing, Rabbi say. In Poland, it was quite cold, and the Torah in his countries wasn't cold. As the Torah says, you chayiv to sleep in the sukkah, and doesn't give us any option. The Ramah quotes it, and the Ramah says, it's not a good enough reason. I guess the Ramah meant in Krakow, it's not cold enough. He says, go bring in blankets. Who asked you to be cold? Go and bring in blankets. I mean, we know that. I once heard from a Yid. He saw that there's an Alta Yid sleeping in a sukkah, and he looks closely and says, hey, there's Rav Moshe Feinstein. Yes, Rav Moshe, Kanira, when Rav Moshe was in the Lower East Side, Kanira, that it was a lot colder than what he was used to in Luban, and I think in Luban he was also Machmer. It's Yadua that Rav David Feinstein, the father of Moshe, Rav David Zecher Tzadik Levracha, that he was Moiser Nefesh Mamish when it came to the mitzvah of sukkah and sleeping in the sukkah. So the Ramah brings his own heter. He says that heter is very difficult. To say that that's what the minhag Klal Yisrael seimach on because it's cold. Klal Yisrael Mechavev mitzvahs, they wouldn't sleep there. They would find a way to sleep there. But the Ramah has his own heter. He says because a person has to sleep in the same room with his wife. He wants to sleep in the same room. That's Kain Taduru. The Maharil, not the Maharal, but the Maharil, he slept in the sukkah with his wife. The Torah Tamim said there's a big Indian for a wife to sleep in the sukkah. She's Messiah to the mitzvah. The Chasam Sofer, Yadua, the ganze Mishpacha slept there. The Kinderlach, the boys, the girls, the items, they all slept in the sukkah over there. And the Kaf HaChaim says it's a Moridik Azach for the children to be sleeping there, even babies to be sleeping there. It's very hailig for the neshama, etc. But the Ramah says, L'maisa, that could be the kula. The person wants to be able to sleep in the comfort with his wife. So that's not Kain to do. He has a mitzvah that he's not able to be there in his wife. Says the Ramah, if you have a communal sukkah, and therefore, those days it was communal sukkahs, and a person wasn't able to sleep there with his wife in the sukkah. That was already a gather of a mitzvah. So the Ramah brings this down. Afterward, the Ramah says this is probably the limit schos. Then the Ramah goes on and he says it's a pretty good heter. It's a good heter. That's in the Darkei Moshe. In the Ramah, he doesn't bring it as friendly. He brings down that maybe it's cold. He brings down that you can't be there with your wife. And then he says that, like a toiv lahachmir type of svara. So I came out of this feeling like this. To go and to be makatrig on Yidden and to say that Yidden are doing the wrong thing. You see, the Ramah was trying to be melamed schos. The Ramah was trying to figure out what's the pshat in the minhag Klal Yisrael. There are definitely people that don't sleep in the sukkah. Kanira, a person that, especially, he got used to all the years sleeping with his wife outside the sukkah because he knew of this heter. So maybe he would have a big agmas nefesh if he could somehow, persuade his wife to come and sleep in the sukkah. Avada shall have a tremendous siyua to the mitzvah. Maybe a person, the Maisa, maybe he's very cold. The Ramah does say toiv lahachmir, but you do see from the Ramah, he was trying to figure out a way to get the person, yes, to be makayim, the mitzvah of sleeping in the sukkah. The Ramah Nachal says a limit schos. It's a limit schos, and you do have to be careful before you say you're a mitzvah patim in a sukkah. Spoke in the last year that the Trumas Hadeshen spoke about a 7x7, a very small sukkah, a 2.5 foot sukkah by 2.5 foot sukkah, and the Trumas Hadashin says you're chayiv to sleep in that sukkah. Why? Because on a flight, you'll sleep on a chair. If you have no choice, you'll sleep like that. So you have to be very careful before you claim that you're a mitzdayer. But akupanim, one thing is clear, there was yashloft in the sukkah, a person that does sleep in the sukkah, he's zicher doing the right thing, he's zicher doing a mitzvah. One that doesn't, you can't condemn him. There are certain svaras. Perhaps for him it's cold, perhaps for him the tsar is tremendous. Okay, nice. Some people, they have different types of levels of tsar. There's the story, I think, with the Kapishnica, that the Kapishnica was very, very not well, and the Satmar Rebbe, Zechron Levracha, was asked if he could visit the Kapishnica to tell the Kapishnica not to sleep in the sukkah, because the Kapishnica wasn't well, it would be dangerous for him. When the Satmar Rebbe got ready to the door, the Kapishnica saw him, Shoheshel, he saw him, and he said to him, Rebbe, red nicht wegen the sukkah. Don't talk about the sukkah. The Rebbe gehasen, if the Rebbe is going to tell me not to sleep in the sukkah, I'm not going to sleep in the sukkah, but I'm going to have tremendous tsar. So the Satmar Rebbe told him before Shlema, Agadion and left. Some people's tsar is to not sleep in the sukkah, and some people's tsar is to sleep in the sukkah. No, upon him, certainly a person should try it. It's certainly not a mitzvah to live ba'aretz. That's the ma'isa, the inyana de yoyma aspect of sleeping. That we'll call the part one of the shir. The part two of the shir is I wanted to talk a little bit more global about sleeping in halacha in general, which is it's a very, very intriguing idea. What's the level of chiyuv of a person? What's the level of chiyuv of a person in general when he sleeps? What's the general din of a person when he sleeps? The lumdis of a person when he sleeps is he goes from, gavra, chefza. He goes, he becomes a chefza. What's the din of this chefza? Is he chayiv in mitzvahs? There's all types of diburim. We know that Rosh Shlomo Zalman had a psak in the Shiva Kol Torah that a bacha goes to sleep. Once he goes to sleep, there's not enough room, so pick him up and take him out. Right? I just got called. There's a bunch of bachrim. That's actually 1,000 bachrim in Chevron Yeshiva right now that was turned into what's called in Eretz Yisrael a malonit. A malonit means in Eretz Yisrael is that if you have corona, so these bachrim will have corona from all different yeshivas. So they were all sent to one yeshiva, Yeshiva Chevron. And over there, they're all there. All these bachrim that have corona and they have to be in bidud, they have to be quarantined. And he told me over there, he's mitzvah pater from sukkah, not because of his machal. He's doing very well, klape the chayli. He said, but klape being able to sleep in a sukkah with 1,000 bachrim, so the different shilas, different psakim from Rosh Shlomo Zalman, like a bachar that goes to sleep, once he's out cold, pick him up and take him out. Is that so simple? It's a psak that many of us have heard. Is that so simple? What's the halacha of a person in sleeping in general? What happens when a person damages when he sleeps? What about if a person has to have a bris milah? I got asked a shaila a few months ago from a person who was about tshuva for about already a few months. The one thing he couldn't do is bris milah. He couldn't even do it, he said, with a local anesthesia. The only thing he told me he'd be willing to do is with a general anesthesia. He said the thought of it is too difficult for him. A general anesthesia, he said that he could do. Is there such a heter? Is he allowed to be Makayim the mitzvah when he's under the total anesthesia? What's halacha? A person turns on a light in the middle of the night while he's sleeping. What's the halacha of kinyonim? What's the halacha when it comes to the mitzvahs? What about tzitzis? What about all the different things? And we have some guidance here, but let's try today to get the full picture. What's the din of a person? Is he mechuyev mitzvahs when he is sleeping? Is he not mechuyev mitzvahs? Could he have a kiyum of mitzvahs when he's sleeping? The Gemara in Baba Kama Dav Chavav says, a yashan is chayiv. If a yashan damages, he's chayiv. Right? And like I'm reading over here, 100%, and I couldn't agree more, that a person that sleeps is a vadil chayra. At least when he goes to sleep, he's getting a mitzvah of trying to keep himself healthy. And the truth is, Rabbi Yisai should know that the biggest issue with Bachram today, Kivyachol, but the biggest issue, at least, is that the Bachar, why can't he learn in the morning? Because he goes to sleep at 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. How do you expect him to learn in the morning? Rav Sheinberg Zechron Levracha used to say, Vayerev vayi boiker. If there's an erev, there'll be a boiker. If he goes to sleep at night, then there'll be a boiker. You know, Matisyahu is ein gesund. He once came to camp and he had a big message to tell the Bachurim, and everyone knew of Matisyahu. It was Murdik Koyach. Everybody's excited. And Matisyahu said, Bachurim, what was the big message? Shlofen by Nacht, go to sleep at night. Halvai Bachurim would hear this. All those very important conversations that Bachurim have in the dormitory. They're going to save, world politics and everything. You know, every Bachur and his ideas. You know, they're going to give that type of Murdik ideas, and why you're not, they're going to grow up to be Israeli cab drivers. You know, let them go to sleep at night, and then Mit Hashem, they'll become big gedolim and big Talmid Chacham, and then all their ideas will have a lot more value. But they go to sleep at night, 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. How's it shaykh to learn? How's it possible to learn? The Taz in Even Ezer in Siman Kaf Hey, the Taz says you have 2 types of people. One person, he sleeps less and he learns more. Because he sleeps less, he sleeps 6 hours a night. Mamela, he learns an extra 2 hours. Taz is another person, he sleeps 8 hours because he needs to be fresh. The Taz is mashma over there that they're equal. Shaveh. I don't know. Sometimes you look at the Bacher who slept for 6 hours, didn't make such a right cheshbon, and he needs a little bit more. Stiplegrad has said that perhaps 7 hours, sometimes, we know Oz Yanuach, Aleph Zayin is 8 hours, the Rambam brings. Others say 7 hours. They bring maybe from the Stipler. But Akapanim, not much less than that, Rabbi Isai. Not much less than that. No, as you get older, you hit the age of 50, they say you don't need as much sleep already. I'm hopefully in Mit Hashem. Can't wait to get there, that I shouldn't need as much sleep anymore. But Avada person has to know how much he could sleep, how much he needs to sleep in order to so that he can be able to do the Avodas Hashem. But that's a side topic. But Akapanim, our topic is to try to figure out what's the status of a person when he sleeps. When a person sleeps, is he Makayim mitzvahs? Is he potter for mitzvahs? Is he oines? So there's a Gemara in Menachos and Daf Mem Gimel. The Gemara brings down that David HaMelech was in the mikveh, he was in the merchatz, and he was orim from the mitzvahs, and he was all upset. He's all orim. And then he realized he had the bris milah, and it calmed him down. Comes again the Magen Avram and Simin Chaf Aleph. He brings in Arizal. And the Arizal says, David HaMelech was only nervous. He didn't have mitzvahs when he was inside the merchatz. No, and what about when he slept at night? What mitzvahs did he have when he slept at night? So the Arizal says, from here is a raya that it must be that you're supposed to wear tzitzis at night when you sleep. The Arizal held it's also a shmira to wear tzitzis at night. So it must be that David HaMelech is wearing his tzitzis. So what do you see from this Arizal? First of all, you see that wearing tzitzis at night is a mitzvah. But number 2 is you see that you could be Makayim mitzvahs when you sleep. Because that's why David HaMelech was only upset when he was in the merchatz and he wasn't wearing his mitzvahs, he wasn't wearing his tzitzis. But when he was at night sleeping, he was wearing tzitzis. So you see, that's why David HaMelech wasn't nervous. So you see, you could be Makayim mitzvahs when you sleep. The Magen Avram argues, but if you look good, in the Magen Avram, you'll see that the Magen Avram just says you don't have a raya from here to tzitzis because David HaMelech had a mezuzah on his wall. And Kanira, the Magen Avram's sheet is that you're only getting the mitzvah when you're being affected by the mezuzah right then. I guess you're in the room with the mezuzah. So that's why you don't have a raya to sleeping in the tzitzis. But you do see from the Magen Avram that he had a mezuzah while he slept. So he was getting the mitzvah while he slept. Again, Bain from the Magen Avram, Bain from the Arizal, you see that you can be Makayim mitzvahs when you sleep. I saw Shnei Nevi'im, Nisnabu, Nevuah Echaz, the Meishav Dover, the Netzivin, Mem Zayin, the Karen Oira, and Menachos, and Daf Lamed Vav. They both say the same Nevuah. They say, what's the Arizal talking about? What's the Magen Avram talking about? Hooray! Lamaisa is a Yashan. David HaMelech was a Yashan. He was potter for mitzvahs. So that's why David HaMelech wasn't upset when he was sleeping. He was only upset when he was in the merchatz. So this is Mamish Archakira. Can you be Makayim mitzvahs while you sleep? The Magen Avram and the Arizal are saying yes. The mitzvah of tzitzis, the mitzvah of mezuzah, the Garanoida and the Heilig Netziv, the Meishav Davar, are saying no. And that's why David HaMelech wasn't upset when David HaMelech was asleep at night, only in the merchatz. He was awake. But when he's asleep, he has no chiyuvim of mitzvahs and he can't be Makayim mitzvahs. Noch a raya. There's a Shulchan Aruch in Siman Nun Hey, the Beis Yosef brings down, versteht sich, what's the din of a person that when he's asleep, could you be mitzaref him to a minion? Can you mitzaref him to a minion? It's a maisim b'kol yoyim, Rabbi Isai. Especially now they have the outside minion. Person falls asleep. in one of these outside minyanim, and he's the 10th man, could you be mitzaref him to the minyan or not? So the Beis Yosef brings down, well, just like we see, you could be mitzaref somebody who is takeh in the middle of Shemoneh Esrei, and he could be the 10th man. So too when he's asleep. Okay, so you see, sleeping person could get a mitzvah. What mitzvah? He's bringing the Shechina. It's called Be'asara Shechina Sharya, and he could bring the Shechina. The Beis Yosef quotes his Rebbe on this, the Mari Bei Rav, and that's it. He's just like a person who's in the middle of Shemoneh Esrei. Kum Segein the Taz. Taz says it can't be. He says, we know that when a person's asleep, he has no Kedusha. We know he's like a mace. That's why we wash Negelvasa. He brings the raya from Siman Dalet, because at night, his body, the neshama get avek, neshama goes out, and he has a tam misa on him, and that's why we say, Hamachzir neshama is lefgar mason. Also the Teres Chaim, in Baba Bas Daf Nun Ches goes on the famous Gemara in Pesachim Daf Kof Yud Beis, which is brought Laloch and Shulchan Aruch and Siman Kufta Zayin in Yeridea, that if you have food under a bed, it's tamei. Says the Teres Chaim, one of the Mekubalim. Why is it tamei? It's like the Teres Chaim. Because under the bed was like an oil amace. The person slept on the bed. That's like a person was a nifter, because the neshama goes out of his body at night. So therefore it permeates under the bed and creates an oil of tomo. So Kaponim says the Taz, how could you include a sleeper as being a bar chiyuva and bringing the Shechina? How could you include a person that's asleep? How could you Bishlama, a person that's awake and he's davening Shemoneh Esrei, so he could be the 10th man because to bring the Shechina, and you can start the Chazar Zashatz or the Kaddish or whatever because he's awake. When he's asleep, he's like a nifter. Another ayah in Even Ezer in Siman Kuf Lamed Ches, this is the Pri Chodesh asks this question on the Shulchan Aruch. Rama over there discusses a woman who's getting a get. A woman who's getting a get. And she's asleep. And Rama says she can't get a get when she's asleep. She's not a bar chiyuva. So he says, you see from over here, l'chayra, not like the Beis Yosef. Can't do mitzvahs, you're not a bar chiyuva. Not a bar chiyuva. B'shas. Excuse me. Not a bar chiyuva. Excuse me. Not a bar chiyuva. B'shas that they're asleep. So this is a big fight. The Stei Chemed in Erech Yoshan, the Stei Chemed in page 58, he brings down, says, look, you can't say a Yoshan is like a Shoite Mamish. You can't say that, because first of all, he brings a Taisus in Sanhedrin, on Daf Nun Ches, a Taisus in Sanhedrin, that says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wouldn't care about the Tumah of Klal Yisrael. He would anyways include them into a minyan. But Akapanim, what's negay us is he brings down that the case of a get, a woman that is asleep, she's not a chatzir mishtameres. That's why she can't accept the get. But you don't have a raya if she's a bar chiyuva or not. It's only because she's not a chatzir mishtameres. She can't be shomer her get. In Ksuvas Daf Kuf Gimel, they bring down the famous Gemara that Rabbeinu HaKadosh used to come back every Friday night and he used to make kiddush for the mishpacha. What do you want? The most that a Yoshan could be is like a mace. That's what the Taz is saying. That a Yoshan is like a mace. No, Rabbeinu HaKadosh was a mace. Says the Sefer Chassidim, Tzadikim b'misasan, akruim chayim. So the most he could be is a mace. And you see that Rabbi was able to make kiddush for them on Friday nights. Now, there's more in this, Rabbi Isai, but the Maisa, we have to figure out here what's the din of a Yoshan. On the one hand, we have from the Arizal, you could be Makayim with tzitzis. We have Magen Avrami, we can Makayim mezuzah. We have the Meshiv Dover, the Netziv saying he can't be Makayim mitzvahs. Karanara is saying he can't be Makayim mitzvahs. The Taz saying he can't be a part of a minyan. The Beis Yosef saying he could be a part of a minyan. The Ramah saying he can't get a get. The Stei Chemed saying it's only because he's not a Chatzir Mishtameres that he can't get a get. We have Rabbeinu HaKadosh coming back and making Kiddush on Friday night. So where do we go from over here? Where do we go? And there's a Taz. The Taz in Siman Ches, in Tiv Tes Vav, he brings down, if a person slept in Sitzis, no bracha in the morning. This is the Taz. Why is there no bracha in the morning? Says the Taz, because the Maisa, he doesn't have a Hesech Hadas Klape the mitzvah of Tzitzis, because he's been wearing Tzitzis the whole time. Wait a minute, he's been wearing Tzitzis the whole time, but he was asleep. Didn't the Taz tell us that when he's asleep, there's no mitzvahs? So now you see that there was a mitzvah. He was being Mekayim a mitzvah even while he slept. So where do we go from over here? Can a person be Mekayim mitzvahs when he sleeps? The Taz seems to be a stira. It tells us you can't include him in the minyan. He can't be the 10th man when he's sleeping. Yet the Taz tells us that when it comes to tzitzis, if he wore tzitzis when he slept, so it's not asik hadas, he doesn't need a new bracha because he's been wearing the tzitzis the entire time. More so, Rabbi Isai. When it comes to sukkah, das is the ganze mitzvah of sukkah, is to be sleeping in the sukkah. So I guess you could be Mekayim mitzvahs while you're sleeping. Like we said before, Gans Masech the sukkah is filled with Yoshin Tachas Amita, and the Iker mitzvah, it says Rashi, Davcha from the base, is sleeping in the sukkah. And the Bikkur Yankiv says that's the Iker mitzvah. So sleeping in the sukkah seems to be an integral part of the mitzvah. The Shulchan Aruch in Yeridei and Shin Ayin Beis, the Ramah brings down, a Kohen is asleep. All of a sudden he finds out somebody was nifter next to him, says the Shulchan Aruch. The Ramah, he brings him Mariel, wake him up, and get him out of there. What's that all about? He has chiyuvim when he's sleeping. He's asleep. He's fast asleep. What do you want from the fellow? He's fast asleep. Why don't you let him sleep? And Chanami, there's a nifter right next to him. But right now he's being metame. He's not being metame himself on purpose. He's asleep. He has a din of a chefza. No, says the Ramah, you got to wake him up, and you got to get him out of the oil mace. God, I remember when early Baruch Finkel, Zeichat Tzadik Levracha, was nifter. He was in the building in the Mir Yeshiva, and they made a mistake. What they should have done is they went around and they woke up all the Kehanim. And they told all the Kehanim to get out of the building. What they should have done is they shouldn't have woken up the Kehanim. And they should have made sure that the Kehanim didn't open the doors of their room. Because if they open up the door, the Tumah goes through the building. What they should have done is they shouldn't have woken them up and told the Kehanim nobody's allowed to come out of their room. Okay, I guess maybe they were worried they would come out. I don't know. Back upon him, that's clear that there is halacha if the person's in the oil mace with the nifter, the kohen, you have to wake up. Now, what's this all about? It seems to be that a kohen, even when he's asleep, has chiyuvim, klape tumah. Klape tumah's ganim. The famous Gemara Brachas, Daf Yud Gimel, Rav Nachman told this Eved, if I'm asleep, wake me up for Kriya Shema. And that's gebracht in halacha in Shulchan Aruch. They brought in Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Samach Beis, and Gimel over there. If a person's sleeping, you have to wake him up for Kriya Shema. So Rashi in the Gemara Brachas wouldn't be a raya. Rashi learns that the case was he was dozing off. He was menamdim. Rashi, the Rambam, but the Shulchan Aruch is a raya. The Shulchan Aruch talks about a case of where the person is mamish sleeping. And when he's mamish sleeping, it says over there, wake him up so that he doesn't miss the man Kriya Shema. It's a machlekes. Do we wake him up for his man Kriya Shema, for his man Tefillah? Some are machmir both. But upon him, it's clear that even when he's asleep, you have to wake him up for this man of Kriya Shema. So hakapanim, but why? He's asleep. What's this all about? Yet the Gemara increases on Daf Yud Aleph, brings down that if a person doesn't have he's mezana while he's asleep, he's potter. He's potter because he's asleep. How could he have a chiyuv when he's sleeping? Gemara increases says that he's potter on averis. Let's say he's nus, that when he's asleep, he's potter. The Gemara Baba Kama and Daf Chavav, we said before, says Adam muad lo'olam afilu yashan. Even when he's sleeping, he's chayiv if he damages. It's Omer Darsheni. The Gemara brought in Shulchan Aruch and Daf Mem Daled talks about a person that sleeps in tefillin. That's an isser. It's an isser to sleep in tefillin. Shema yafiach. So today I'm going to tell you a Yisayid, Rabbi Yisai, and hopefully this Yisayid will help us for many different shilas. This is the Yisayid that the Karen David talks about in Siman Yud Ches. And the Halicha Shloima that I mentioned in the Marmakoimis, in Tefillah, in the Meluim, in Yud Beis, he brings down like this. A Yashan can't be chayiv in most mitzvahs. And that's bar. In most mitzvahs, he can't be chayiv. How could you be chayiv him? He's a Yashan, he's asleep. He can't be a chayiv in the mitzvah. But he's not a shoita. The Gemara Sanhedrin and Daf Mem Zayin brings down that a person was mafresh a korban, set aside a korban, and then he became a shaita. Now that korban is nidches. It became dachi. It became nifsal, nidche. Mashe'en came a person was mafresh a korban, and he goes to sleep. Says the Gemara Mefurish that the korban is not nidche. Says the Gemara because a yashan is not a shaita. If a person sets aside a korban and he goes to sleep, the korban doesn't become pasul. We don't say it's nidche because now you can't bring the korban because you're asleep. No, but if he becomes a shoita, He loses his mind. He's a different person. The korban becomes puzzle, and it's nidche. So what's this, Rabbi Isai? And Ad Kidei Kach, the Ramah brings down, you can't give a woman a get when she's asleep, but you could give the get to her shliach. So you see that a shliach would work when a woman is asleep. So what's this, Rabbi Isai? You see over here that a person that's asleep is not a shaita, but he's not chayiv in most mitzvahs. When you're asleep, you're not chayiv in most mitzvahs. But it's not a shaita. It's a temporary issue, as we'll call it. So therefore, could the get be chal while she's asleep? Could be chal. Okay. But could you give it to her? Can't give it to her. Maybe because she's not a chatzah mishtemeres. The Taz, when he talked about a yashan, the Taz told us he can't be mitzaref to a minion. And the Mishabura Taka also is not so thrilled with a yashan being a member of a minion. Yet when he sleeps in sittis, it's not considered a hefsek. What's the pshat in this? The idea is, is that whatever mitzvah you could be Mekayim when you're asleep, avada, there's an inyan to be Mekayim it. Like tzitzis. Your body is melubash in tzitzis, so you can be Mekayim that when you sleep. Mezuzah on your wall, you can Mekayim when you sleep. A sukkah, you can be Mekayim when you sleep. Adarabba, the Iker Kiyim is when you sleep. So you're getting a mitzvah when you sleep. So why is that? Because it's something you could do when you sleep. They bring a Yavitz. I think it's a bit misquoted. The Yavitz is in Chelik Beis, in Simitari Zayin. The Yavitz, it's like a 2-line tshuva. I always expected it would be a massive tshuva. The Yavitz over there is discussing a situation of, they bring down that the Yavitz says a yashin is like a shaita. It's not exactly accurate. The Yavitz is discussing, can a person be Mekayim Puravu when he's sleeping? That's what he's discussing. It's like a 2-line tshuva. He brings a raya from light, and he says that he's allowed bar das legamre, he's not chayiv in averis, and he doesn't get nena. She brings the raya from light, and he brings down that therefore he can't be mekayim the mitzvah puravu. He can't be mekayim the mitzvah puravu, because how can he be mekayim the mitzvah puravu when he's sleeping? He can't have a chiyuv of going and doing a ma'isa to be mekayim puravu while he's asleep. The more ksiya, the Yavitz himself in Simon Chav Aleph brings down, you should just sleep in sittis, because that's something you could do. You could do. A mitzvah that you could do. And for example, mazik, that's your responsibility. Your tchilasei b'pshia. If you put yourself into a situation of when you slept in an oifen of where you might damage, so then that's considered your responsibility. Dechsam Sefer, in the famous tshuva in Kuf Pei Daled, Dechsam Sefer discusses the case where a lady accidentally crushed a 15-day-old baby to death while she was sleeping. She was nursing, the baby crushed to death. Some Sefer says, in that case, she doesn't even need a kapara, because there she didn't do anything which was out of the ordinary. She didn't do something which can be considered that she's a mazik. Each case you have to done. Is it something that it's my responsibility? I put myself into that situation. You're a mazik. If a person could put himself into the situation of wearing tzitzis and getting the mitzvah, you can quite possibly get the mitzvah, says the Arizal, says the Mogen Avram. Quite possibly you can get the mitzvah. If a person says the Taz, and that's why it's not considered a hefsek. You Sheveretz Yisrael, you could be Mekayim while you sleep. They bring in Ibn Ezra and Veschanon. Ibn Ezra says you can't be Mekayim mitzvahs when you sleep. Go and look at the Ibn Ezra. He's talking about B'shach B'cha of Kumecha. He says B'shach B'cha means when you go to sleep, not when you're sleeping. Of course, because you can't learn Torah when you sleep. Even though there's the Imrei Bina brings from the Arizal and the Akadama of the Imrei Bina, he brings down over there. What does it mean? Kinoyim B'shachif HaRav L'Hayishmaitza. Someone once asked me, should I wake up my chavrusa when he's asleep? I told him, look, I don't know, until Ben Adam Chavera, it looks like he needs to sleep, and you're not dealing now with sukkahs that maybe you have to wake him up. But I told him, Kinoyim Meshachev HaRav L'Hayishmaitza, the Rebbeinu brings down from that Rizal, that Rav was, everyone asked the Kasha, how could you say Rav was sleeping when he said that Svar, the Marik, the Chavetz Chaim, they all deal with the Shad. The Arizal says, no. There are certain svaras that Rav was only able to attain when he was asleep. Because as I helik a shluf, as I'm gahat, as I shluf, the story with Arizal Alain, that Arizal once his lips were moving when he was asleep. Chaim Vital asked him, Rebbe, he said it would take me 70 years to explain to you what went on in that dream. Avada. If you dream like that, but most people can't learn when they're sleeping. As I beside, says the Ibn Ezra, means must be when you're going to sleep, because you can't be Mekayim mitzvahs when you sleep. It doesn't mean a klal in general about when you sleep. It means over here, you can't be Mekayim the mitzvah of learning Torah when you sleep. There are Baz in Chelakei and Simon Kukov Hey discusses, says about any mitzvah that requires kavanah, says you can't do when you're sleeping because you're not shaykh to sleep and do a mitzvah. He says, I've seen many times people sleepwalking and doing all types of things and they're not Mekayim mitzvahs, he writes. But upon him, if you have a mitzvah like tzitzis, if I say right now, you're probably not thinking about your tzitzis, how are you being Mekayim the mitzvah? Because when you put them on, you had the kavanah. Same thing with the sukkah. Same thing with the mezuzah. Same thing, probably you should write. So who adin before you go to sleep? The fact that I'm not thinking about the mitzvah of tzitzis, the mitzvah of sukkah, it al das v'shoinu, I said, like Taisa says in Zvachim, who adin the opposite. A person's going to say, oh, I have a yichud problem. It's not a problem. I'm going to go to sleep right now before I go to sleep. His sister-in-law is coming over or something. Right now before I go to sleep, it's no yichud. She's not here. When I'll be asleep, it's not my problem. It's not my problem. It's her problem. Why? Because I'll be asleep. No, not. That's tchilasei b'pshia. You're held accountable. You put yourself into that situation. What does the Mishnah Nova say in Gimel Yud Aleph? 3 things are moitzias adam. Gimel dvarim are moitzi adam in a oilam. One of them is sheina shachris. Because he misses man kriyashma, misses man tefillah. That's your fault. That's considered tchilasei b'pshia. Like the Yam Shel Shloimeh says in Baba Kama in Gimel, a person that got terribly drunk and became mamish shaita. He says, you're yes chayiv. I was a shaita at the time. Who gave you a right to put yourself into the situation when you become a shaita? Who had been by Nesikin? If I went to sleep, says Taisis above Daf Dalit, and there was nothing near me, and then afterwards somebody came and he put something down and I broke it, no tchilasa b'pshia. I'm a person that's asleep. That's a Gemara Krisis Daf Yud Aleph, that I'm not chayiv on something when I'm asleep if it wasn't my responsibility. But beforehand, of course, a person would be chayiv if he put himself into a situation of where he's going to damage. That's chilasai b'pshia v'saifai b'ainas. And who adin l'gabe mitzvahs? If there's something that you could put yourself into a situation that you'll get a mitzvah, so then you'll get a mitzvah because you're not a shaita. You can have a chalais chal on you, and therefore, that's what comes out. That's why we find the Masas Binyamin brings down in Chavav, the famous Gemara, Yashan, B'Shmini in the Sukkah. It means not Shmini Atzeres of the Americans, where there's a lot of people that have the minhag to sleep in the Sukkah. It means Yashan B'Shmini, like if I would sleep on Shmini Atzeres in the Sukkah to get the mitzvah, Yilka, he gets Malkus. What's the Malkus? Kozman, what, I walk into a Sukkah, I get Malkus? No, if you go to sleep, you get Malkus. Why? Because Tchilasei B'Pshia, you have no right to put yourself into that situation. The Masas Binyamin is discussing a case, the exact same case of the Chassam Sofer, seemingly. And he says the lady needs to do kapara. She also crushed the baby. The answer is very simple. The Achreinim explained the Chassam Sofer was talking about a case of where she was blameless. It wasn't her fault. The Masas Binyamin is talking about a place of where she was taka, she was a bizayin. But that's what leads us to one more Yisayid, Rabbi Isa, before we get into the cases. There's a Moridik problem still. What are we going to do with Tumas Kayanim? Why are we waking up this Kayan that went to sleep? It wasn't his fault that the guy next to him died. He wasn't snoring that loud. It wasn't his fault that the person died. So why is it that we find such a halacha that you have to wake up the Kayan? Now we can't say what we said. There's no tchilasei b'pshia. He put himself into the situation that the person next to him is going to die. Maybe if he's a goysis, you could say. So what's this all about? So what if you have a case of somebody tells you, listen, if you get to my house in 5 minutes, I'm going to give you $10 million. You run. By the time you get to his house, it's 6 minutes because it's not your fault. There was a garbage truck in front of the garbage truck. You come into his house, you're huffing and puffing. You tell him, okay, I'm here. He says to you, sorry, 5 minutes. I told you 5 minutes, it's 6 minutes. He says, I give out, but it's not my fault. I know, it's not your fault. But Oinus is lav command the Ovid. You're an Oinus, but it's not as if you did it, says the Shach in Choshen Mishpat in Simin Chav Aleph. You didn't do it. So the fellow starts crying. Why are you crying? It's not your fault. I mean, it's not my fault, but I didn't get it. That's why I'm crying, because I didn't get it, Maisa. But Oinus is lav it's one of Patre. Yeah, but it's lav command the Ovid. It's not as if you did it. And this is why there's a new vart over here, says the Karen LaDavid in Yud Ches. He says that sometimes there are certain things which are a mitzias. Like Tchuma on a kohen is a mitzias. That's a mitzias. That mitzias, even though it's not his fault. But it's like, the house is burning. So the fireman's going to say, no, we're not going to save that guy because he's sleeping. What are you talking about? What shaykhis? It's a mitzias. He's going to burn. Got to get him out of there. It's the same thing. The tumah is burning him. So it's an ongoing mitzias. And this is why it's a taka, kivyachol, like a bezoyin of his kahuna. It's a bezoyin of his kahuna. That's how Shlomo Zalman discusses it. And that's why every single moment it's a tumah chadasha. It's like a fire burning. His tumah, his kedusha, his kahuna is being defiled. And that's why you have to wake him up. So now we have, like this. Menamnim, someone who's like dozing, avad chayiv in mitzvahs. Yashon, we have that. He's not chayiv in most mitzvahs, but anything that he could put himself into, yes. And we have the klal of tchilasa b'pshia and seifei b'aynis. Anything that's his responsibility beforehand, that's his responsibility. Then afterward, we have a klal of a mitzias, something that's a mitzias. For example, our Baisai, that's why you have to wake him up for his man kriyishma, because he's going to get 50 billion trillion endless amounts. If you wake him up for kriyishma, so what are you going to say? Well, he's pater. Yeah, maybe he's pater. Maybe he's pater. But what's the nafkamina if he's pater? I'm not talking even in the case of Tchilas Abshi, went to bed at 5 o'clock in the morning, where it's an Aveira putting himself into that matzah. Maybe he's pater. He went to bed normally. It's not his fault, but he's not. But it's a mitzias, says Rosh Shlomo Zalman. He's not going to get the billions of what is a mitzvah. He's not going to get the kriyishma. So, and that's why the Rav Payalim, he brings down a person when he sleeps, let him listen to Torah in the background. Somebody once told me, listen to one of my shiurim 15 times. 15 times. It's been a really good shiur. He says, I don't know what the shiur was about, but all I know is that my CD, MP3, whatever it was, kept going over and over and over and over and over again. He was out cold sleeping. He says, Neshama was listening to the shiur. He doesn't know what the shiur is about, but the Neshama was listening to the shiur over and over and over again. And the Rav Payalim says, that's a good thing. To listen to a shiur when you're sleeping, because it goes in, it's a mitzias. There are certain things which are taka mitzias. Now, let's just say a few cases. First of all, as you go through Shulchan Aruch, now you understand why Negel Vaser, you have to watch 3 times. It has nothing to do with dirty. It's a Ruach Ra. It's for the Tumas HaMeis on Yom Kippur. Some have the minig that they wash their hands after Yom Kippur. The full hand. You should know that many Mekubalim do not, because on Yom Kippur, the Ruach HaTumah goes out of your body always. And it goes until here. And it's left the mace on your hands, the Tumas HaMeis. On Yom Kippur was so heilig, it goes and goes and goes all the way to the finger loch. So you don't have to wash after Yom Kippur, Yom Kippur, because the Ruach HaTumah that permeated your body left all the way to here. What about on Tisha B'Av? On Tisha B'Av, the Ruach Ra, he says, these guys, they're so low. Who needs to start with them? And he leaves all the way to the fingers also. That's what it says in the Kabbalah. But Al Kapanim, that's why we watch. It's not just for Nikias. You understand what you're doing now. Person gets back his neshama in the morning. When it comes to tzitzis, is it kedai to wear tzitzis when you sleep? What you heard today is, also, most people sleep after alais these days. And after alais, there's a mitzvah after alais. And it's a mitzvah that he can put himself into. He wants to be able to make the bracha. So if he wears a talis, there's no problem. He'll make the bracha on the talis. But if he wears tzitzis, a bacher, so you tell him, fine, so get a second pair of tzitzis, and then you'll make the bracha on the second pair. That way, I guess make sure you switch it off every once in a while so that it shouldn't become a beged of Shena, just like a beged Laila. But upon anybody who doesn't have the minig of wearing tzitzis at night, you should know Shulchan Aruch is mashma. You shouldn't, because he's mashma. It's bizayin. And I think in Bnei Brak, the Chazon Ish Tafka, I think did not wear tzitzis at night. But we also understand somebody that does wear tzitzis at night. You see the Yavitz, the Taz, they seem to say you are getting a mitzvah, and it's not considered a hesach hadas even. Tefillin is certainly bizayin. That's that mitzias vort that we spoke about before. If you're wearing tefillin and you fall asleep, there maybe you have to wake up the person simply because shema yafiach. And if it's shema yafiach, he might do a bizayin to the tefillin. That's a mitzias. So even if it's not his fault, but that's a mitzias. If he's menamnim, no. So maybe he's in control. Sukkah, we know that even a Shena Sarai is a problem. That we know already. By Birchas HaTorah, does a person make a new Birchas HaTorah if he sleeps during the day? So the Ma'aseh, the minig is not. Someone told me, B'Shem Rav Moshe, that Rav Moshe never made a new Birchas HaTorah during the day. Why? Because Every sleep was a chetimtza of giving him the strength to be able to learn. As a bezai, it wasn't a stira to the learning. It was enhancing the learning. It was a chetimtza for the learning. It was a recharge of his battery. Like the Taz said in Ebenezer and Simin Chafei, that the entire sleep could be a mitzvah. Legabe mitzaref, a sleeping person to a minyan. You saw today, it's not pashut at all. Taz, Mishabura, Pri Chadash are not very happy. Mishabura says, wake him up. Just go and wake him up. Sman Kriyashma, certainly you should wake him up. I guess if he threatens you, I don't know, maybe you don't have to give up your life for it. But if a person, the Gabi Avdallah, sometimes in the European countries, Havdalah is not till 11:30 at night, and the kids want to go to sleep and make Havdalah in the morning. So maybe there'd be an eitzah and let him make Havdalah by plag. Shalach is you're allowed to make Havdalah by plag. But Rabbi Isai, I would say no. Let him go to sleep. He gets more to Tosefes Shabbos, and he'll make Havdalah in the morning. I saw the Lahiris Nasan. He says, what? How's he going to get Tosefes Shabbos when he's sleeping? Why not? Why not? Why can't you get Tosefes Shabbos when you're sleeping? It's a mitzvah you can do when you sleep. Right? I'll prove it to you. Every Shabbos we sleep, and we get the mitzvah of Einik Shabbos. It's nothing wrong with that. When it comes to a person that accidentally turns on a light, we were zeicha to speak about this with that Gouda a few weeks ago. The person turns on the light, not when he's sleepwalking. If he's sleepwalking, mamish, he doesn't even know what he's doing. So that's the Gemara in Greece, that he's now chayiv, and there's nothing he can do about it. It's not his fault. But if let's say, he's in the middle, he's dozing, he's up, that's called not misasik, that's called shoygig. That's called you forgot Shabbos. If it goes on, that's like the case of Rabbi Shmuel, when he was sitting and learning, and he monkeyed with the light, and he has to bring the chat to Shmeina. So that a person for sure has to be careful. The problem is right after it, he goes, oops, and then turns it off again. To be misakin as a very, does another aver. On Pesach, people make a mistake. It doesn't say to learn the whole entire night and see it's Mitzrayim. It says, ad shetech tefeneshena, until you fall asleep. The mitzvah is until you fall asleep. By Purim, also, ad yada, says the Rama, until you fall asleep. Drink until you fall asleep, at least if you that shita. No, the Gabe, Rishleim Zalman, the Steichemed, when it comes to Sukkah, which is in Yana de Yoima, Rishleim Zalman is of the opinion you can take him out of the Sukkah once he's asleep. The Steichemed says, Avadanat, Techemet says, he gets a mitzvah while he's sleeping, like we said today. So it says, you have no right to take away his mitzvah. Says the Techemet, I'll prove it to you. Listen to the Techemet. I'll prove it to you that a person gets a mitzvah of sleep, of sukkah, of sleeping in the sukkah. While he's sleeping, he gets a mitzvah, even while he's asleep. He says, because we never heard of anybody carrying out somebody from the sukkah. That was his right. Shlomo Zalman said, you're allowed to carry him out. Anyway, it seems to be that in the, the Vidal of the Chaveda, it doesn't seem to be so pushy to pull somebody out of the sukkah. He's probably going to be quite upset. Like that which I mentioned, you have to wake somebody up if he falls asleep outside the sukkah. If you look in the Ben Ish Chai and Hazinu, it's a little bit misquoted. He doesn't say to wake up somebody who's asleep out of the sukkah. He says someone that's menamnim. Menamnim means he's dozing. Him for sure, you have to make sure he doesn't fall asleep. Once he's outside the sukkah and he's already asleep, that already... could be to wake him, he'll be a mitzdayer. So maybe not. Maybe you don't have to wake him up. That could be already a little bit of a mitzdayer. If the child or somebody rolls out of the sukkah, no, Mal Diskin is famous Mal Diskin, where he proves that if somebody sleeps in a way of where he's under a piece of schach and he's going to roll, he proves that that won't be a problem. I guess he considered that not to be tchilasei b'pshia. I suppose it's not considered tchilasei b'pshia. Okay, now Rav Shlomo Zalman has a kasha on himself. Shar Tshuva and Tafresh Lamed Tes discusses a case of where there's only one place for someone to sleep. So the Shar Tshuva discusses how they should divide the night and whatever. So Shlomo Zalman says, I have a simple answer. According to me, very simple. This guy will go to sleep, and then we'll pick him up and carry him out, and then I'll go to sleep. Shlomo Zalman says, no, you can't plan it, even according to me that I allow it, but you can't plan it. Can't plan it because that would be tchilasei b'pshia, v'seifai b'aynes. You can't plan it, even according to Shlomo Zalman. But again, the whole chiddush for Shlomo Zalman is a very big chiddush. I heard from Rav Nissen Karel, Zeichat Tzadik Levracha. He held it was not the emes of psak halacha. He held that sleeping in the sukkah is the mitzvah, and you have no right to remove his mitzvah, and therefore you are getting a mitzvah kol rega v'rega. The like of Shlomo Zalman, l'chayr. You could ask a question. I know many ask in Hanukkah, how you allowed, everyone knows in Shulchan Aruch, Tafresh Ayin Beis, Shabur brings down, that person comes home late at night, he can wake up his wife and kids for the Pesuma Nisa of his Hanukkah lech. No, Gezel Shein is the one gezel that you can't pay back. How do you have a right to wake up your wife and kids in order for you to get the Chanukah licht? So that the poskim say a very simple teretz. There, it's the father of the house. He's being Mekayim, the Ner Yishu Beisa. It's your mitzvah too. He's doing it for you. If the father can't be madlik in a persuma dika, so then your mitzvah suffers. So therefore he has a right to wake you up for your mitzvah. Person that's sleeping prakadon in Reish Lametes, the person not supposed to sleep on his back, he's not supposed to sleep on his stomach, he's supposed to sleep on his left side, and then in the middle of the night to turn to the right side, like the Kitzur brings down. If he's sleeping on prakadon in such a way, right, maybe you have to wake him up. Maybe it's a mechshel, okay? I'm not paskening. Ramosha has an intriguing shaila in your day. I brought it in the Marmei Kaimis in Aleph Reish Lamed. He was discussing a case of a skin graft from a mace to a kohen, and he says, well, that's a big problem because he's not going to be able to have the mace. They'll be in the oil with the mace to get the graft onto his body. So Ramosha says, well, maybe he'll say when he's asleep, he'll be in oinus. Or he won't even be oinus, he'll just be asleep. He'll be put. Says Ramosha, no, that's tchilasa b'pshia, like we mentioned that you say many times. He said, just like you find by Lot was only held accountable for the second child because it happened the first night. He should have realized already. So therefore, it's tchilasa b'pshia, v'soifai b'oinus. The bris milah with the anesthesia, this is a shaila which is a very, very big shaila to do in general. The poskim are very, very careful and weary to deviate and to do anesthesia, not b'chalal, never to deviate from the tzuras mitzvah that always was. Ramoshin Chelik Dalet and Siman Mem discusses that maybe even anesthesia is not healthy, and we need the tsar yenuka because alecha iragnu kol hayoyim. But a full anesthesia, that Ramosha writes, that's mamish like a shaita, because you can't even wake him up. A full anesthesia is worse than sleeping because you can't even wake him up, says Ramosha, and then he's not going to get the mitzvah at all. And Rav Osner has a tshuva about it, where he discusses maybe b'shas chak, no, but that's only if it's a local anesthesia. But a full anesthesia loses the mitzvah because you can't even wake him up. That would be certainly a problem. I want to just tell you that the stipler, like I mentioned before in the Kraini, the Igrasa, he says a person needs to sleep at least 7 hours, right? He says there's some Yaitzim in a cloud, they can get away with 6. And there's some Yaitzim in a cloud, they need a little bit more, they need 8. But certainly a person should sleep 7 hours. When he gets a little bit older, he'll need a little bit less sleep. Very important to remember not to sleep in your shoes. Very important to remember. The Gemara says that Yitayim Tamisa, and it's also Kasha L'Shikcha. Person should never sleep in his shoes. And L'Maisa, like I mentioned, the only gezel that you can't return is gezel sheina, Rabbi Isai. You want to make a Simchas Beishoeva till 3 o'clock in the morning. That's very nice. That's very nice. If you live in a room, in a house that has, these soundproof walls, that's very, very nice. But if you're not going to be living in a house and the person next to you is suffering, I don't know if that's so good. I don't know, Rabbi Isai. I just leave you with what I heard from Rav Gans, Zalzan Gesund. He took his son, a bar mitzvah boy, to the stipler, and the stipler told him, he asked the stipler, how can my son become a gadol b'Torah? So the stipler told him, he'll learn 12 hours a day. You daven over the course of 2 hours a day, shacharis, with the mincha, with the ma'ariv, with the getting ready. 2 hours a day, taking care of your physical needs, eating, sleeping, etc. No, and 8 hours a day sleeping, 7 at night, 1 maybe during the daytime, to break it up, a person that needs to do that, to break up his sleep, and then he'll become a gadol b'Torah. No, so I hope, as Hashem, that we were zeiche to have a little bit of the chatzi lachem. That's the learning of the Torah. That's the geshmak. That's the chatzi lachem. And now we'll all go to sleep in the sukkah, and there will be mekayim now the chatzi lashem. The chatzi lashem, the emes mitzvah of sleeping in the sukkah. I wish you all a good yontiv, and Bez Hashem, I hope it won't just be in my sukkah in Yerushalayim Yer HaKodesh to your sukkahs. It'll be all together in Yerushalayim Yer HaKodesh, Be'ezus Hashem. No, And then you won't even need me to give the shir. You have Rav Moshe to give the shir over there. All our great Rebbeim will be able to give. Rav Yashin will be. All the chaver that are on my walls, they'll be able to give the shir Bez Hashem. Shall be zeicha to good yontif, a geschmacke yontif. And like the Olam is showing that what's their simchas yontif, what's the chati lachem, is the limud Torah, a good style. Chati lachem, limud Torah, hafla fella. I get yontif, Rabbi Yisrael, I get mayid, I get the